everyone, welcome back to another flower farming classroom episode. Today we're going to talk about another one of my favorite fillers, and that is called Silver Shield or Plectranthus argentatus. Now, a lot of people have probably never heard of Silver Shield, and I had never heard of it until my local grower friend Jess introduced me to this amazing filler last year. So let's check out what the agenda for today is. If you saw my Mountain Mint episode, this is a very similar format. In fact, I kind of copied the slides, but we're going to talk about why you absolutely need to grow it. Then we're going to talk about some pros, and of course, we're going to have some very basic growing 101. And then I think more importantly, we're going to take a field trip outside to look at the current Silver Shield that is growing in my field. And we're going to talk a little bit about the yield as well as where I am able to sell them. Now, even though the scientific name is called Plectranthus argentatus, it is also known as Coleus argentatus, which means that it is a part of the mint family. Now, the best way I can describe Silver Shield is like lamb's ear meets Coleus. So it's got this very velvety green leafy texture. It's got this great color. It kind of changes to a more deep green when it's wet, and when it's dry, it takes on this like paler, like felty green. It's really hard to explain, but it pairs well in a lot of different types of arrangements. Now, the great thing about this plant is that it has a ton of side shoots, and you're gonna see this when we go outside. You're gonna see how I was able to get so many cuttings off of just about a dozen plants. Unfortunately, it is not native to where I am in the US, which is New Jersey on the East Coast, but it is native to Australia. So especially those on the East Coast in New South Wales and Queensland, that is where it comes from. Now, that being said, it is not an invasive, and you find it quite a bit in landscaping plants in the US, and it is hardy down to zone 10, which is not a lot of people, but if you live in zone 10 or 11, you will be able to overwinter these. Let's talk about some other pros. If you have a big area where you want to do some landscaping, this is a very good contender. It has a compact bush-like habit. It can grow up to 3 feet tall. Now, the ones that I have out in the field, which you'll see later, are not 3 feet tall, unfortunately, but I find that even with my stem length of around 14 to 16 inches, it's more than plenty for the designers and for the retail bouquets that I am making. Silver Shield does prefer some partial shade. It does prefer some moist soil, but it is very flexible. So you'll see how mine outside is grown in full sunlight. And I would say that I am not the greatest about watering. We don't have irrigation set up. Part of it is because I just want to figure out what can be drought tolerant in my zone, especially as the summers sometimes feel like that they're getting a little bit more droughty or sometimes even more wet. And Silver Shield can do well in both, so it can be drought tolerant. The other great thing about this is that it has the ability to outcompete weeds. So that is always a plus. And last but not least, it is technically deer resistant. I put an asterisk on this because I have had other experiences with this, and I'll talk about this in more detail when we go outside. So now that we've gone through the classroom piece of it, let's take a field trip out to my field where you'll be able to see my Silver Shield. We are now in the field trip portion of our video, and I wanted to show you just what my small space looks like growing Silver Shield. I've been harvesting from this for a few weeks now for my market. I sell predominantly these stems to the co-op because the designers will pay a decent amount of money, at least in my book, for these versus using them as filler in my retail bouquets. So I think just showing you this is gonna give you a lot of context for what I talked about earlier. Now, this is my growing space. It is a fenced in area. It is about 40 by 90 feet, including the walkways. And this over here is my little patch of Silver Shield. So you can see it has full sun. There is nothing shielding it. And I think if I were to do this over, I would definitely put it in a space where there is a little bit more shade. But even though they're getting full sun, they're still doing really, really well. There are some leaves which are yellowing a little bit, and I don't think that's because of the sun, because most of these are doing quite well. So it's a pretty small patch, and I would say I had about 15 seedlings that I put in back in May. I probably lost one or two because my dog ran over them and kind of snapped off the young seedling. And at the time, I honestly didn't do a great job of transplanting them. I was actually transplanting with a friend's 4-year-old, and we were starting to run out of time. Didn't water them deeply enough, so they took a little bit of time to take, but you can tell they're still doing really well. So let's just call it I grew about 12, 13 that came to fruition, and let's look at how many stems I got from that. It's pretty apparent where I've been cutting. Where I've been cutting, there's been a lot of new growth, and I started cutting about a month ago. So to date, I have sold 3 bunches, which is 30 stems at my co-op, and I would say I've probably used an additional 20 stems for my retail bouquets. So that from 13 plants is quite a bit. So let's just show you how prolific this is. This is one plant. I'm getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 viable, we'll call it stems off of this. And once I cut it, of course, it's going to continue growing. Now, the problem is because frost will be coming in probably about a month and a half-ish. I don't know realistically if I'm going to get any viable stems off of these. But the good part is that I'm still getting a lot of volume off of this right now in the first flush. I would say that seeing some of the other silver shield out there, this is not even that great. It's relatively shorter in terms of stem length. It's still totally usable for the bouquets as well as for the designers who buy it. But I had said earlier that some of them reach 3 feet. So I think in the right kind of conditions where it's shady, the soil is a little bit more moist, you can get a really, really good crop that is probably going to give you more than 6 stems per plant. So there's a lot more potential with this, and I would call this a okay average type of crop. So I think there's a lot more potential if we are more deliberate, or I am more deliberate about how I grow it next year. So we talked earlier about how unhardy silver shield is. I mean, being hardy down to zone 10, 11 is basically not hardy at all. So what that means is that you need to start it every single year from seed. But one of the reasons why I love silver shield is because it roots so easily. Literally, you put it into a vase with water, it will start growing roots, and it is one of the last fillers to die. So last year I bought some in the form of filler from my local grower friend Jess. I used them in bouquets, and there were, I think there's one bouquet that I had where it didn't sell at a market, so it's like, let me keep it. And that bouquet had silver shield, and it started rooting. So I was like, you know what? Let me try to overwinter this in my house and see how it does. So let me show you what those 2 stems look like right now. These are the 2 stems that I had rooted since last year in a vase with just water, no soil, in my living room. Now, the reason why this looks so janky is because the deer nibbled on them when they first came out. That being said, this is still pretty decent stem over here. You can tell it's very, very much alive. And this is why I think, even though technically it's deer resistant, I would still plant it in a more protected area. I just think that nowadays the deer are so desperate that they will really eat anything, even if it's something that they don't prefer. But this goes to show you that you could definitely overwinter the silver shield in just water. I think it'd be better if you used soil, but then you could potentially transplant these in the spring and get a viable flush for cutting for your bouquets or to sell to florists, and that would also help keep down the cost of seed. to wrap up this video, let's talk about numbers. So I had mentioned before that I've sold 3 bunches to my designers at the co-op that I sell at, and I sell each stem for $1.45. I sell them in 10 bunch stems, which means that I am getting $14.50 per bunch. Every single time I list them, they are grabbed. I brought an extra bunch to market floor once and they were grabbed. So actually, now that I think about it, I've sold 4 bunches at the co-op, and I listed another bunch this week and it quickly got taken up. So I really wish I grew more. No one else at my co-op is growing this, so I don't have any competition here. I feel like $1.45 is the right range. No one is balking at the price, and I'm still able to clearly make a profit off of it. Now, when I use this in my retail arrangements, I typically reserve it for vases because I feel like it is easier to see in the vase when I arrange it. The stems are also a little bit shorter sometimes for the longer stems that I've been using in my retail bouquets. So I've had a lot of lilies, which typically have longer stems. I've had a lot of lisianthus now come in. They also have had really long stems. So it just hasn't been as convenient in using the Silver Shield, which is roughly about 14 to 16 inches. Now, when I use them for my retail bouquets, I would say that on average, I am pricing them roughly around the same as what I sell to the co-op, which at the end of the day, you want your retail stems to be definitely higher than what you price to your wholesale designers. But sometimes I find that filler is a lot more difficult for me to get that higher price value than what I can get from my designers. So for the most part, that is why I try to reserve it for my florists. Had a bit of technical difficulty with the TV projecting, so we're just gonna put a nice piece of art on here. And sorry for the stomping that you may have heard, that was the baby. But anyway, I hope that this video was helpful for you. If you never heard about Silver Shield, you should really consider growing it, especially given the fact that it is so versatile. You can put it in landscaping, you could hypothetically root it in water to overwinter it, and the fact that so few other people are growing it. It's something unique. It's something that you could probably sell to florists quite easily because it kind of reminds me of a Dusty Miller type of texture, but not the same color. Dusty Miller is a lot more silvery and a lot more dusty white. This is similar in that texture, but definitely more green, and it has normal leaf-like structure. So give it a shot if you've never tried it, and let me know how it goes in the comments. And if you've been growing it, let me know what your experience has been growing Silver Shield, and I will see you in the next video.